tells me to start, we'll start. It's my great honor to welcome Kerwin and your team for tonight's program. I just wanted to give a little introduction to this program. Linda said that we're coming up to 5 years. In August of this year, it'll be 5 years of doing this monthly program of Let's Talk About Race. Since we get a lot of positive feedback from people, one of the comments we hear a lot is people would like to, continue the conversation, have a little bit more time either at the evenings or in between the monthly events. So starting next month, February 8th, and it'll be the second Saturday of each month, we're going to do a short little get-together called Continue the Conversation. So it'll be a Saturday afternoon from like 3:30 to 4:30, not a program. Come have coffee or tea, and we'll talk with coffee, like that, like we do in New Jersey. The next program, just so you can mark your calendars, will be February 26th. Rick Gefkin is going to give a presentation on this project he's working on called the New Jersey Slavery Index, which is a database that is intended to house all the information on slavery in New Jersey. If you haven't seen this month's February National Geographic, there's a big article dedicated to the last slave ship that came into the States. That ties into tonight's program as well. The memorial monument that we want to place in Eatontown is dedicated to Mingo Jack, Samuel Johnson, who was born a slave here in Colts Neck. This is another interesting book where you can learn a lot of information about slavery in Monmouth County. Some of the names that you see all the time: Schenck, Laird, Hartshorn, these were slave owners. This is just important information for us to keep in mind. The March program, March 25th, we're going to honor Harriet Tubman. And the one last thing I wanted to say before I introduce Kerwin is that one of the best things any of us could do is try to recreate a program like this in your own area. Who here is not in Red Bank, does not live in Red Bank? A lot of folks. We'd be happy to talk to you about how we do this, some ideas, references for ideas for speakers and so on. We're a committee. Linda is the program director here at the library. Joe and Julie, raise your hands, are on our little committee, and myself. We're always looking for ideas, and like I said, we would love to see this grow in communities around the area. For tonight's program, remember, we don't talk about politics. We try to wait our turn to speak, so try to avoid crosstalk and so on. And if you haven't signed in, we'll pass the paper around later. Minister Kerwin Webb is our guest tonight, our guest speaker. He's president of the Greater Red Bank NAACP and a coalition liaison for the Equal Justice Initiative Community Remembrance Project in Monmouth County, which some of us know is involved in claiming the monument for the lynching of Samuel Johnson. Actually, Kerwin grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and ended up in New Jersey when he came here to volunteer after Hurricane Sandy. And that probably is a whole nother story. What made you stay in New Jersey? But hey, this is God's country too. So he is licensed to preach at the Pilgrim Baptist Church here in Red Bank, and Pastor Porter is the main pastor at Pilgrim, for those of you who don't know. We consider him one of our local heroes. Later, Kerwin earned a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Ceremony, now works as an education specialist for Interfaith Neighbors in Asbury Park, youth program coordinator for Next Generation Ministries. There's really so many qualifications, it's kind of hard, but I do want to say, I think the main thing that Kerwin brings is his civil engagement and activism, and part of the program tonight is going to be to help each one of us get engaged and find ways that we can be activists in our own community. He's been able to find synergies and strategies for these missions. One of the other important things he does is the RMW Foundation. I couldn't find out what those initials were.
RMW, Renew My World.
Renew My World, okay. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to feed, educate, and empower. So I would now introduce you to Kerwin, and you'll tell us when we're ready for questions and answers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patty, for that introduction. And when I got the invite, I was smart enough to know that I couldn't do this by myself. So I enlisted some help of some friends who I've had conversations with about race, and I know they're deep thinkers, and they are actually people who are doing things about race in their own little world. And so I figured that having them to help me with this might be helpful. So first, to my left is Rabbi Mark Klein of the Monmouth Reformed Temple. To my right, Brigitte Montier, who Brookdale Community College and Monmouth County Human Relations Commission. Unica Cox, Brookdale Community College, and which housing authority?
Displaced Homemaker Services. I'm a board member of the Affordable Housing Alliance.
There we go. And Sister Sherry Stanford, Brookdale. And
Second Baptist Church, Pastor Parker, you are one of our associates. Is that what you want?
No.
I do love that though.
She's an educator and one who is deeply thoughtful about the Black experience in America, and so she'll be able to provide a lot of insight. So I asked these people to join me because they'll make me better as we dialogue in this conversation. So introduce yourself. Why are you? Mark Klein is also on the coalition, Social Justice Members Coalition. So just tell them a little bit about yourself before we go.
I'm Mark. I am Rabbi at Monmouth Reformed Temple. I'm serving the Red Bank Human Relations Advisory Committee and a bunch of other places. I'm blessed to be able to do a lot of incredible work, and I'm here because you asked me, but I'm an activist that masquerades as a rabbi. I'm not a normal rabbi. I believe this radical thought that this one God should be accessible and available to everybody, and that we need to remember that we start off as human beings, whatever the labels that we impose on ourselves or are imposed upon us. So it's when I was practicing law in Little Rock, Arkansas, I was the only white lawyer in an all African-American law firm. It was starting. I did their civil rights work. When I was in Florence, South Carolina, Julian Bond and I and 5 others led the March on Columbia, South Carolina to take down the Confederate flag. And so I've been knee-deep in the hoopla and blessed to have incredible teachers along the way.
Thank you. Brigitte?
Wow. Well, my name is Birgit Mondesir, and I say it that way because it's German and it's also French. And I only say that because it goes against everything that's sitting in front of you. And that in itself gives reason for thought, because I say my name, and then I show up somewhere and the mouths fall open. So I'm sitting here as a Black woman living the African American experience, and I will go into more of that later.
That was nice. I don't even know how to introduce myself. So I'm Unica. I work at Brookdale Community College, and I've been working with diverse populations for like the last 6 years. Domestic violence victims, people who needed or needed help and in need of housing. I have an innate passion to help and desire to help people in the community who have needs regardless of race, but I do realize that's a very important thing that we should focus on and accept and acknowledge exists as an issue in this country. So I'm here today. Thanks.
I'm Sherry Stanford. I'm from Brookdale Community College. Kerwin gives me far too much credit. In terms of just what I do, my passion is really traveling. I'm going to come back to that, but I've been teaching and tutoring at Brookdale in the English department for 25 years. In terms of my teaching, my passion is really, and I have to say, I have to give that asterisk, at-risk communities. I hate that, but that's the only way people kind of understand it. But I'm from Neptune, so I've always been devoted to our extension sites in the communities, not the main campus, because that's where the students who look like me, who are poor like me, who may not look like me, but not have the same access to the things that students at the main campus get, that's where they are. So that's where I've always been, whether it's teaching students who are in Brookdale or getting ready for Brookdale. The other piece, my master's, which was a passion project that was way too expensive, is in sustainable destination management. So for Brookdale, I've also created study abroad trips. In fact, it was the first one to Africa and also the first that included volunteerism. We went to Ghana, not the continent of Africa, we went to the country of Ghana. So I've taken students to Ghana. I was there at the year of return last year. And so now my passion is really making sure that as many people, whether you look like me or you don't look like me, you get to Ghana, because it is a moving experience. We've talked about it. I'm trying to get students specifically to Ghana, because when Black students understand where they've come from, it increases their self-esteem and thereby increases their ability to just thrive and learn, and because they have a foundation for who they are. So that's where I am.
Great. So when I asked Rabbi Klein to do this, he said, just let's talk about race. He said, I'm tired of talking about race. Let's do something about race. And part of what we are doing in a small way is we formed the New Jersey Social Justice Remembrance Coalition. This is a program or a project in collaboration with Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, the organization that has the Legacy Memorial and Museum that documented the lynchings of Blacks in America. Over 4,000 documented cases of lynchings. And EJI started the program, the Community Remembrance Project, as part of their campaign to recognize the victims of lynching by collecting soil samples from lynching sites, erecting historical markers, and creating the National Memorial that acknowledges the horrors of racial injustice. It's a conversation starter for them. And so the way the program works is every county, or any county that had a documented lynching, they want that residents in that community to claim that marker as a way to let the community know, hey, this happened in our area. And not only that, but that a conversation still needs to be had, because the issues that underlie those lynchings have not gone away. And so we, different groups and organizations came together in an effort to work with EJI to get one of these markers, but also to begin the conversation, especially in 2020 with the undertones in our country. It's an important thing to do, is to remember that there are multiple sides to any story that's told. So EJI believes that we need a new era of truth and justice that starts with confronting our history of racial injustice, which is one of the reasons I was excited about doing this, because it allows us to have the conversation and then continue it afterwards. So again, our proposal was submitted in November. EJI sent it back and asked us if we wanted to add the soil sample and to add in more information about how we wanted to do that. But our proposal is in the works, and we fully expect EJI to work with us on that. Equal Justice Initiative, the founder Brian Stevenson has dedicated his career, over 30 years, to helping poor people, condemned people on death row, to just bring legal services to those who couldn't afford it. That became his passion. EJI is a human rights organization in Montgomery that have done everything from eliminating excessive and unfair sentencing, exonerating death row inmates, and changing the way children and the mentally ill are sent to prison. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice, this is a place where it has those monuments and you can reflect and see just how entrenched the culture of lynching and racism was. Why is this important? Because racism is in the DNA of America. It's part of America. And so that requires action to actually do something about it. We can't just not talk about it and it goes away. We have to take action steps to get there. While physical slavery and legalized discrimination may have ended long ago, we still haven't corrected for those consequences of what happened. Some people mistakenly believe that all the racist people died or lived down south. Not so. And I'll end this part with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, we won't remember the words of our enemies, but we'll remember the silence of our friends. And I think back to Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail, where he was writing to white clergymen and women, men probably in that time, about how their silence was complicity. How they was condemning him for trying to do the work that the Bible says we should do as believers, as Christians. While they were condemning him as an agitator, they were sitting by and letting things happen. Unfortunately, that might be the case with us now as well. And so I hope that opportunities like this, discussions like this, conversations like this will compel us to action, to let us know that all we have to do is have conversations with the people who are around us. Let us stop the discrimination that we see in our midst, and then slowly the world will change. How you said let you know when the question is answered.
Do you want to open to questions for the audience now? Or ask the audience questions?
Well, let me do it this way. Let me ask my panelists some questions first to get us going, and then we can just jump in, audience. We'll just have a fluid dialogue. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, so my first question, and this is to anybody, but I'd like some of your thoughts. Why is the issue of race important to you? Is the issue of race important to you?
Repeat that again, please.
Is the issue of race important, and why, if so?
The issue of race is important, and like you just mentioned, it being in the DNA of America and systematically placed over time, it's going to take a very long time to get over it and get through it. Through educating the community and people, over time, we'll be able to eventually, I think, get to a point where we can coexist and not have hatred, this underlying unnecessary hatred towards one another. But it's important to me because I'm a Black woman and because I have a Black son and Black family members. And even outside of just being Black, I think racism is just detrimental to us as a culture and a society. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't, help to develop communities. It doesn't help us in any way. So that's why I feel like it's important.
I don't think you can be faithful in any of our traditions without realizing that we have to go back to human first. And we get stuck not on human race, but on the divisions of biology. And then the word race is really a challenging word. Antisemitism is the word we use for Jew hatred. But most Jews aren't Semitic. Semitic is Mediterranean, Middle Eastern. And most of the Jew haters are Semitic. So the term anti-Semitism is really a misnomer to begin with. But in that sense, we see each other more on the labels that confront our eyes and not the ones that are in our hearts. And I don't know how any of us can really pray in any of these houses of worship for peace, for humanity, for dignity, without struggling with our prejudices, the ones that we're born with or cultured into. And it's our job in faith to overcome those pieces which separate us. And that's the struggle. In my tradition, the Messianic age happens on that day when God will be one and God's name will be one, not when God will be Jewish and we'll all speak Hebrew. The idea that I can be who I am and love who you are, and I think I said to you earlier, Kerwin, the idea that a chef's salad would be really boring if it was all green. So the Quran teaches that God created us all different so that we could celebrate this much broader pot that we find ourselves in, and we're not there yet.
Let me jump into that. The question is, why is race important?
To you.
To me. And I'll expand that to any of us. And really, the answer to that is, it's not. It really shouldn't be. What exactly is race? One's outward appearance, the shade of your skin, the complexion of your hair. Why would something that insignificant to a person's character actually matter? And that's the question that we're really asking. So it's really not about race, because you could be green and I could have been orange. Would it be about race? It's really about how we see each other, our perception of each other, and whether that perception is based in fear and ignorance or in intelligence. And what we've had in America is the miseducation of an entire country that's complicit within the people who live in this country. In other words, we are voluntarily and completely ignorant of who we really are. And I say voluntarily because we can see and be better if we wanted to, but we don't, because it's a lot safer and it feels better to kowtow to those fear mongers, and we all know who they are, that divide us rather than look at the truth of who we really are. Because the truth of who we really are first has to be looked at. That's a deep, dark secret. And instead of looking at what's really there, we prefer to point a finger at someone else and say that this is the reason why I feel the way I feel about you, because of what you have done or my perception of who you are. It's a lot harder to do some self-examination. And that requires peeling away that very non-significant outer layer, which bears the color of our skins, the texture of our hair, and looking at who we are as human beings. So the answer to that question is, it really shouldn't be, but it is because we make it so.
So let me ask this. If the race problem was fixed, what does the world look like? And this is for anybody.
Exactly as it looks right now. It looks exactly as
So
it
the
looks
look
right
would be
now.
the same. Well, what is the purpose of talking about race then?
Because the part of race that we need to fix is nothing that's physical.
All right, so
It's everything that's internal.
So what do we do
It's
about
everything
it?
that we were conditioned to feel,
Right.
what we were conditioned to believe, our cultural existence.
But
And
let's get to solutions though. How do we roll that back? How do we correct
well,
that?
we're doing what we're doing right now. We're doing exactly what we're doing right now. We're forcing ourselves to look at each other in a different perspective. If you hear me, and I know all of you do right now, if you had a perception of black people being ignorant or dull or stupid or whatever those generalizations that are out there, you've just heard me speak, and you cannot leave this room with that very same notion, can you? So the fact that I'm here and I'm expressing myself in the very same way that you might, even though you're not the same color as I am, that has to change your mind. You can't unknow what you know, and that's how we break down the barrier of race and ignorance. We have to sit and look at each other and face each other so that you can see that, no, she really is any different. She's no different than I am. And even though I walked in here thinking that black people were a certain way, well, I now know one person who's not. So what does that do for us? I'm not gonna monopolize. Take over.
Okay.
Kerwin, may I ask just a question? Just about that question of why is race important to you? And I really have to, may I just ask the question to the audience? Because I don't know, this is not my world. So when you're white, is race important to you? Like, can I just ask you, when you, do you think about race every day? Your race?
About my particular race
Uh-huh.
or race in?
No, just your
Your
race.
race.
No, because I happen to be a man of privilege because I happen to be white in this country. So to me, I feel I have a lot more advantage than someone who obviously is a different color than me, or anybody who is an other, whether it's gay, lesbian, blacks, Hispanics, immigrants, come from immigrant parents. I know that I have lots of privileges just because of the way I look and because of my male gender that everybody else doesn't have. So I don't look at myself other than knowing I have that privilege, and I know other people that aren't like me don't have that. So I think about that more than about that I'm white.
And I
Does that
so
make sense?
appreciate that, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I so appreciate that you know that, you understand that. So let me ask another question, because I want to, this idea of, is race important to you? Because I have to disagree. It's important to me. But it's very much, it's important to me because I'm black. And I'm reminded of that every single day. So it's important to me. So I wonder, as you know, the majority, the predominant group, do you feel sometimes that blacks talk too much about race? Tell the truth. I want this place to be a place of
I
honesty.
feel like you're looking at me.
No, just because you're in my line of sight.
I'm not, I don't mean that
Mhm.
negative. What was your question again?
Do you feel like when you hear us talk about race, because if it
Do
were
I feel like blacks talk too much about
too
race?
much about it,
I don't. I'm probably a little strange in
Mhm.
that I've always been sensitive to this issue.
Mhm.
Probably because up until I was about 4 years old, we were the only white family in a little neighborhood in East Orange.
okay.
And then, boop, we'd get up and moved to an all-white neighborhood in Middletown. So I can only imagine something about my child mind was like trying to figure out how to process this. So I honestly, after, like the civil rights era and the 70s, trying to talk to white people about race was risking a real fight. And I'm always up for a fight because I'm Irish. But it doesn't accomplish anything. So I let a lot of opportunities go by where I didn't say anything. But I'm very sensitive to everything you're saying. We have to talk about it, but it shouldn't be black people who are doing all the talking. White people have to stand up, speak up. So we showed, did we show it here? I think we showed it here and at the Citizens for Diverse Open Society. There's a little YouTube video by this young man named Derek Black who grew up in the white supremacist movement. And one of the things he said, and he had a change of heart. He is like, I think, would like to erase the first so many years of his life. But one of the things he said is that if you're in a room of all white people and somebody starts up with that kind of racist talk, if only one person speaks up to say, not even to start a fight, but just to say the slightest thing, like, I'm not so sure you should be, doing that, I don't agree, whatever it is, it will almost always shut them down. And he knows what he's talking about.
I think this is like the audience, just to keep coming back to that question. I think this audience may be the wrong audience because we're only here because we're talking about that, right? But I think as a black person, I'm always, my thing is, They probably think I'm always thinking about black, but I was born black. I was called a nigger in second grade, in a predominantly white school. And when I go at 52, when I take my big pocketbook to the store, I tighten it up, I put it on my shoulder, wherever it may be, because I don't want to be followed, I don't want to be perceived as stealing. So it's like, to answer that question, I'm always thinking race is always important, because I'm either trying to defy stereotypes, I'm trying to make you believe that I'm not who you think I am, whether it's black or big or woman or whatever it is. So it just feels like race it's important to me because that's all I have, that's all I've known, and the world has made it important to me, where it shouldn't be. So
I think your question is just the opposite, that black people themselves have not talked about race enough. And there's many, many reasons why that has occurred.
we don't.
Well, I have a unique situation because I have 3 black children. And I talk about race all the time. And I know that most of my white family thinks that's all I talk about. So I think you're right. In this room, it may not be the case.
Right.
But I've heard so many times, why is it always about race? Why is it always about race? Why? And meanwhile, my kids are 16, and they just had a conversation today with their friends about every time they go to the park, all the white families pack up. I live in Bricktown, and go home. And this is what they deal with. Like, that's not even something they thought to mention. It's just what they deal with every day. So, yeah, the world makes it about race. So of course that's what you think about.
Ma'am, what's your name?
Alma
Mine?
Yes, ma'am.
Alma Penn.
That's my mother-in-law.
Mrs. Penn just brought up something that I think is helpful that we understand. And I can talk, but if you choose not to listen, you haven't heard it. And so black people, I think, have been talking about race. They haven't been heard. White people hear about race, and some get offended because you're talking about it too much. Or, that wasn't me, that was back then, get over it. And so the communication has not been effective. What black people are, and I noticed this as both of you were speaking, you're emotional and it's paining you to talk about it. And I know because you have a black son. And that, I don't think anybody can understand the despair on a black parent if they have a black boy, especially child. And so, that's why I thank you for being here, because I know it's tough, right? She's got a black son. She hasn't had as much life experience, but I know she's experienced things with her son. And so, my question then for us, is this fruitful? Is it worth it? What happens after, to your question to you, when I first asked you about it? How many of you will leave this room and do something with what you heard? Go ahead.
You're just raising your hand. I'm going to try to keep an eye on who's raising their hands in turn.
You know, before we go any further, let me just clarify this, because what I was saying is not that race was not important. Okay?
Well, I just said to me.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
I answered the
It's
question.
not that it's not important. What I'm trying to do is get us to stop using that word as a meaning of all things that we think and feel.
A catch-all term.
A catch-all term.
Okay.
And that's why I said it's really not about the race of a person, because I could be orange and you could be blue, right? Would it be about race then? So we're really not talking about race. When we talk about race, we're talking about what it means to be a certain person.
We're talking about differences.
We're talking about differences, and that's why I want to pull down that race label, because, and absolutely, of course, I know what it's like to feel what race means in America. I live it every day. But what I'm trying to do is to change the perception of just that tag word and get you to go beyond that. When you're not thinking race when you see me, you're thinking she's not intelligent. she must not live in a proper neighborhood. She probably doesn't speak well. These are all the things that's happening in your mind. You're not just saying I'm black. And that's what I was trying to clarify.
And that's why I say, you know, we've got to get back to human, because the labels that we impose on each other end up being the ways in which we will define people's value systems. You know, and race is a challenging word, because, as I said, it's ambiguous. You know, when I left Kentucky, Lexington, 6 years ago, one of the people I met, the last people I met for the first time, mid-conversation says, "Wait, you're Jewish? I thought you were white." So, you know, and then, of course, and at the risk of violating a rule, I'm no longer an American. Because to protect me, even though there are anti-discrimination laws on the books, that and religion is a protected class, there had to be a new law that protected me as a foreign nationalist. Because a hate crime against a foreign nationalist becomes a hate crime. And so now I'm a member of the Jewish nation that doesn't exist. And I'm not an American, because if I'm an American, I'm not covered under that law. So, you know, it's absolutely how we devalue each other's humanity by segmenting people into a certain piece of the population on all of the artificial ways in which we do it. So, I am always cognizant of my Jewish status. I'm white. I suffer from very little discrimination because I'm white. I have incredible privilege because I'm white. Except that among some white people, I'm not really white. You are more honest than I am, because they know who you are when you walk in the room. I've deceived them, thinking that I'm one of them. And, you know, so it absolutely isn't, you know, and Brigitte, I absolutely agree with you. It shouldn't be about the label. It's about the human, and we're not there yet because we have preconceptions. The number of phone calls I get at the synagogue, can you give me the name of a good Jewish lawyer?
Wow.
Well, I can give you the name of a bunch of lawyers. Some are Jewish and some are not. And if you want the Jewish lawyers, some are good and some are not. You know, but the preconceptions that we impose on each other are just horrific, and that's our norm. And when I was in South Carolina, my first congregation, I also served a small congregation in King Street, and I should have known better than this, but it was 2 weeks before the March on Columbia, and I invited this conservative congregation in King Street to join in the march. And the matriarch of the congregation started going on about those people. And I did everything I could politely to change the conversation and dissuade. And I said, sneeze at the truth. There's a Yiddish saying, Genes not dem sneeze at the truth. So this is the gospel. Okay? So at one point I said, you know, your children don't get followed when they go to the store. At which point she said, you better follow those people, they'll rob you blind. At which point I said the second worst possible thing a rabbi could say from the pulpit. Ma'am, you're a bigot. That was the second worst. All hell broke loose, at which point I said the worst possible thing that your rabbi could say, and I said, oh, I get it. You don't mind being a bigot, you just don't want to be called one. Never served that congregation again. But again, even in a religious world where we're taught the dignity of everybody, we find this absolute bigotry that transcends any words that you're going to say or preach or sing.
So Birgit, I'm sorry, Beta, you had your hand up. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I didn't want to bring it up again, but I will. Auschwitz just happened. Don't say anything, but think. You hear my accent. What comes up for you? I go through this every day. And if I don't open my mouth, I'm just seen as a nice white blonde woman. I open my mouth and different tape runs in your heads. Every one of you. Every one of you. Some of you are aware of it and want to say this isn't fair. But the first reaction has to do with the accent that comes from a country that did Auschwitz. Okay?
And I'm glad you brought up
So it happens to white people too, to Jewish white people.
So
So we have to be very careful when we talk about belonging to this or this group. And we're all
What
doing all
Beyonce's
the
referring to, if, whoever missed it on the news, Monday the 27th was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp of Auschwitz. There is a book that came out a few months ago in 2019 called Learning from the Germans, and it's about how the Germans have been trying to reconcile with their Nazi past and what we can learn in the United States. And it's written by a Jewish American woman who grew up in the South and now has lived for 20 years in Berlin. So she has a very interesting perspective. I really recommend that book.
And she wants to stay there too.
And she wants to stay. And did you have your hand up earlier? No one.
Yes.
Joe?
You pose a very interesting question about race. And I can always kind of talk from my perspective. When I get up every day, it's a day. Sun shining, raining, whatever, I dress accordingly. And then not until I get into whatever environment I'm in, do I then decide, or then the situation forces me into something of race. All right, so if I'm at a store and my big bag, follow me, okay, because I'm not going to change that, because I'm not going to own your ignorance of me wanting to steal something. Okay, I'm not going to own it, all right? What I have found in my work environment, that is when I had to zip on every race garment I ever owned, because the dumbest stuff comes at you every hour of the day. Okay? What do you want to do for lunch? Oh, Joe, you want to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken? Really? Really? Wow. All right, and I might want to, but don't make that assumption that that's what I want to do. Right? But you feel comfortable saying that to me. Okay? You feel comfortable. You feel comfortable if I say my parents were laborers. All right? Oh, wow. And my dad, his boss, said something to him we grew up with all of our lives. Yeah, my father was, I guess, talking at lunch. He had dreams for his kids, and his owner, his boss said, "Oh, you're nothing but a dumb, stupid oppressor. They're not going to do anything." Right? So it's the comments, it's the assumptions that are made, like Getz said, that are made about people, all right, that have no validity, right? And I think as you get older, you just kind of like, all right, let's just, yeah, you get used to it. You go, okay, what's the stupid stuff I'm going to hear today? All right, and we don't even talk about it. We don't even share it among each other because it's just no big deal to us. All right, it really isn't.
It's just Tuesday.
It's whatever. Okay, all right. I got to look at them tomorrow. Okay, but I don't make those kinds of assumptions with white counterparts. I don't. I really don't. I'll notice you got white skin and dark hair. You have white skin, you wear glasses. That's all I really see. Until you open your mouth. Right? Stop doing that. just stop. But then again, I have to accept, maybe you're asking or you're saying something because you really just don't know. So then it's that time for me to jump into that skin to educate you to some of the facts. All right? So, you know, that's fine. But do we talk too much about it? For us, we talk about it when we have to. We put you in place when we have to. Okay? We check you when we have to. All right? That's all. That's as easy as it is. That's as easy as it gets for me. And then I don't extend the conversation to where did you get that from? All right? Because somehow you own that. That's your world, all right? That you keep hearing it from your family and that kind of thing. that's your world. My world is a little different. So I think it's important for us to just kind of live our lives as naturally as we can, as organically as we can. And then, you know, where my mother would probably never disagree with anything anyone said, but she came out of that generation where she wouldn't. I'm of a generation where we, of that 60s, 70s, where our mouth was always going.
We have one more question.
Okay. Yes.
What you've been talking about, other people have been talking about microaggressions.
Yes.
I would challenge you about that it's a no big deal, because studies have shown the enormous toll it takes on people. There are studies that show the racial difference in morbidity, mortality, the illness that it causes, the early death that it causes. Racism really kills, and that's something that's not adequately acknowledged in this country.
And I think, I'm sorry, I just have to comment on that. Because when I speak about the psychological burden that is unrelenting, that never stops in every situation, each and every day, that is real. That's real for me. There is never an instance where I'm not saying, is it because I am black? And there's never an instance where I'm not aware of my blackness. It doesn't matter. I go to work every day, and as soon as I walk into that office, I'm aware of myself. And that is something I know, as the only black person in that office, that I carry, and I have to grapple with, and I have to compartmentalize so that I can continue to be as everybody else is, functioning on that level. But it's a weight that you carry that you never get rid of. So yes, most definitely it's completely real, it's completely valid, and that is one of the psychological legacies of hurt that sustains itself until this day. It's been 400 years, 1619, right? And I still feel it as palpable as I'm sure my ancestors did. And yes, that is why we cannot say it's okay, it's not. We have come to a point where we have to raise our consciousness, we have to be aware of each other's humanity, and there's no more room for excusing it, because when we do, we get back to the silence of our friends.
I'm a pediatrician, a retired pediatrician, and a teaching pediatrician. The issue that I'll speak on is what happens in the next generation. Because it's called transactional theory. The stresses of one generation, if a child experiences them, then the bigotry that they experience, the slur, the racist comment, isn't just what happened then, it's like it reverberates back through generations. And what's happening with this ratcheting back from pre-civil rights era to almost like reestablish, well, the reestablishing with the criminal justice failure and the rejection of voter reform, all the things that are happening right now aren't just happening right now. They're happening in like an accordion that goes all the way back. And until it's broken for 2 generations, it'll keep going. It's going to go to the grandchildren unless there's a break. And then there's also what's very interesting called epigenetic phenomenon, in which it actually changes the stress responses of the child. That if a woman experiences stresses in pregnancy, stress responses of the infant are going to be different when they occur. Which gets a little bit back to the recurrent anti-Semitism of these last 5 years. I had the privilege of living about 45 years without anti-Semitism. I think it's all going away. I look at racism as like as something that's always there. You can't walk away from it. It's like someone's born with a short leg. Although it's society, not the person. The society is born with a short leg, wakefully. So anti-Semitism is a little bit like herpes, societal herpes. When times are good, it doesn't come up, and when times are bad, it just leaps out.
So I'll ask this question, and then I have a thought about it, and I'd be interested in some discussion. Why is this so intractable? Why is this problem so difficult to get at and change. It's systemic.
It's in our DNA.
It's in the DNA.
And denial is not just a river in Egypt.
Denial. Thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah, because we live in segregated neighborhoods.
Segregation.
One thing I like to say before I say what I'm going to say, and do like this if I talk too much because I'm a senior citizen and I talk a lot. But the one thing I want to say before I say what I'm going to say is these type of meetings we need to do more often to hear what people really feel and think.
Okay.
And there's racism within ourselves. I know I'm black, but I didn't even think about it until I was sitting down here and everybody was talking. And I don't have any problem with her hair, but and I never said anything to myself, but when I came in and I looked at her hair, all of a sudden I thought something was wrong with her hair. That maybe was showing too much black. I don't know what I thought. But okay.
The gentleman behind you.
Well, I was thinking that in America, and maybe even in Western culture, everyone's trying to make an us and them differentiation.
Okay.
You're never content with who you are until you can define who the other is. And even if there is no race, if we got rid of the race issue, it would be how much money you make, what neighborhood you live in, what's your nationality. I came from Brooklyn, and all the white kids could joke with each other if you were Polish or Italian or Irish. 2 generations before that, that would be serious stuff. But everyone could joke about that, but there were no black people in my schools, in my parish, in my neighborhood. And when they came in to protest, then you saw that whole us versus them come up.
Like Brian Stevenson said, we've never reconciled. We okayed slavery because we convinced ourselves that whites were better than blacks, and we've never changed that narrative.
I just want to say also, the background for tonight's conversation also is about Brian Stevenson. The book he wrote is called Just Mercy. There is a feature film in the theaters, or just came out of the theaters now, called Just Mercy, and it's about the project that Kerwin mentioned. And what's the name of the documentary?
True Justice.
True Justice. It's all about this very issue, the Innocence Project, freeing innocent people from death row, etc., and this project with the lynchings.
So True Justice is available online for free for anybody, and it's really good.
Very important. Who was next?
I just wanted to say, I believe racism is still deliberately being encouraged. I have a real problem. Since I started this program, people would say, oh, the generation now, they don't see race. That's baloney. Like, I have 3 sons. It's much harder having white sons than white daughters, because what I learned was cops go after white sons much more than they would white daughters. But if you add a black boy to that scenario, then you have the police stopping them and going through their backpacks in your hometown for no reason other than they're walking down the street. So racism is still taught. There's still, and this is all over the world. I have a son who lived in Colombia and now Peru, and the blackest people in Colombia were not thought of highly at all. I mean, in most countries, the blackest people are the people that the country treats, the least advantageously. So I don't believe that this is something that just happens. I think it's taught. I think it's taught by people that are supposed to be protecting us, and that's why I think it's so important that people do have these conversations and realize, if you know someone else's story, it humanizes them, and then suddenly you have a chance.
I think that from the people I've met and run across, most white people are too damn lazy to think hard. It's comfortable, they're safe. And having an African-American baby who's very grown up and has his own family, if I stay quiet, I don't make friends all around, I stay quiet. And I make a decision who I could possibly waste my time on. Because if you're someone who doesn't like my child, sight unseen, I have no use for you. And generally, I know I talk too much about race because people will say, well, what are you doing? You know, how's your life? And you shouldn't ask. You don't ask if you don't want to know. So, just the general conclusion is to try to bring it up with someone who I have to interact with, but, you know, not in a deep way. And move on to the next something. Too darn lazy because it's so comfortable to not have to think about it and to think about what decision am I making about banking or real estate or anything.
Let me throw-
It's just.
Let me throw one out.
And this lady also had her hand up.
I don't think it's necessarily laziness, I think it's comfort. Their comfort in being white or privileged, and they don't want to give that up by
Jumping in.
Nor does one want to face that.
Yeah.
I mean, to face that, you have to admit a lot about yourself.
Yes. The idea that the younger generation is different and isn't feeling racist among white kids. I remind people, did you see pictures of of Charlottesville? Who was marching? Those were not bad people.
There were good people there. I'm sorry.
Let me, real quick.
I've got a bumper sticker. I collect bumper stickers. And I've got one that says, under Republicans, man oppresses man. Under Democrats, it's exactly the opposite. Okay? Because it's not about representation, it's about power, and power roots in fear. So you can call it comfort, you can call it laziness, but I really think that most people are afraid to admit that there's somebody else equal out there. And so I'm going to build the walls around my fear and my ignorance, and that's what I'm going to live in at all cost. And so the violent response we get when we start talking about race or religion or things like that all come from this notion that I'm not secure enough in who I am to be remotely concerned with the security in who you are.
Let me throw one out there that I haven't heard anybody say yet. Money. There's money to be made off of making people think that you are different or less than.
Money and power.
If we look at the history of the slave trade, of race, it has always been based in economic exploitation. And so if anybody has conversations about race and it does not talk about money, then you are missing the boat. That's why the conversations don't go anywhere. It's difficult for people who have money to deal with race because their money will be affected. Anybody who understands wrong, right? We all have insurance on our cars, yes? Because if you damage somebody's property, you are responsible for repairing that property. Where's the repair for slavery? And then when that conversation comes up, it gets pushed to it's impossible. We can't do it. How will we know who? All of these things, because if you touch people where they hurt or where they love, and I say money is America's God. So if you touch their God, then they're going to fight you. Now, I can say this because God allowed me last year to see and experience some amazing things. I went to Soweto and Cape Town, South Africa. I went to Stellenbosch University, the place that birthed the idea of apartheid. Okay? I graduated in May from Princeton Seminary, and they did an internal audit of their ties to slavery, and they're wrestling with that right now. Right? So everywhere you look, where racism is entrenched and systemic, it's because it was built off of exploitation of people. Now, I don't want to have a conversation and just talk and leave and nothing happens. Follow the money. Why are our prisons full of people that look like this? Why are there people making money off of locking people up?
Restricting the vote so that you can't vote differently.
That's just a continuation of Jim Crow.
Oh, it is. And by the way, Nazi Germany, if you go and you look at the writings of the leaders of the Third Reich, they're quoting Jim Crow America. Okay? So America bred the Nazi movement.
One of my seminary classes, it was called Readings in Latin American Liberation Theology. The author was Enrique Dussel. It was one of the many articles that we had to read, and it was called, the title of it was The Invention of the Americas. And in it, Dussel talked about how Europe or the West was not always considered the center of the world. It wasn't until colonialism started to happen and they started taking the new land and established themselves and said, this is the center. This is how we will colonize these lands. Unfortunately, religion, Christianity, went right hand in hand with the sword, which is why some black people have issues with Christianity. And here's my problem. That same mentality and thinking still permeates its way into our churches. Right? Willie Lynch syndrome and those types of things. So these are the ideologies and the mentalities that say, I cannot let you succeed because your success is my failure. And because you're short and because I'm a man, you should serve me. We might not say it anymore, but it's enshrined in our organizations, in our institutions, in our ideologies. How do we change it, is my question.
A couple of weeks ago, there was an obituary in the New York Times. We call that the Irish racing forms, by the way, obituaries. Just a little cultural aside. Okay, the obituary, I'm sorry I can't remember the woman's name, but she was in California, and she started a movement. I think she just called it simply integrated schools. And she had an untimely death at the age of 46. She got hit by a car. But her reaction to integrating schools by busing and by these laws and that laws and the whole charter school thing was to talk to white people and say, stop doing this and just send your kids to the same schools where they're supposed to be going. Live in the neighborhoods that are mixed. If you don't like maybe that school in every which way, send your kids there anyway. Help them, help all the kids, help the school. It was pretty, it's pretty radical. It's a whole, I mean, when we think, somebody in this room mentioned, make a choice about where we live and where we send our kids to school. It's just one of many things that has this deep, deep impact. I'm sorry, lady right behind you, and then you, and then you.
Yeah, a profound question about what can we do about it, and I think a lot of communities are doing something about it. And I think about, I was recently in Richmond, Virginia, right, the home of the Confederacy, and many of these communities are wrestling with, that one in particular has, Monument Avenue with Robert E. Lee and all of their grand generals on massive statues, on their horses, one right after another down this, and all these communities are rethinking their history, and these are, they're all very difficult questions because, it's part of the history, but the other side of it is, I do think it's changing because the opposite of that was recently a young, super talented black artist did a sort of play on that monument, and it was in Times Square a couple of weeks ago, and it is a young black man on a stallion looking so strong, fierce, powerful, and that statue is now at the Richmond Museum of Fine Arts. So I think we are, Martin Luther King, right, change is going to take low, and it's going to take a long time, but the arc of justice is moving in the right way. So I think there are, and I think that example of Richmond has taken place in Princeton and lots of other colleges. So, small, but I think they're quite poignant.
I was just going to say with the school situation, Tinton Falls. I grew up in Seabright. We moved to Tinton Falls when I was in junior high. The rabbi will know where Swing River School is. We had a superintendent named George Malone. A lot of whites were moving in Virginia, and blacks coming and retiring from the service, whatever, moving into Tinton Falls. And where they did not want us to go to, was now Tinton Falls Middle School. So Twin River School was built off of Hants Avenue. It was built back because of the airport. And so what George Malone did, he says, no, we will bus white kids to Hants Avenue, to Swing River School, because they wanted this because Hants Park area was kind of getting more blacks, living there. And he says, no, we are going to have white kids bus to this school or whatever. But now it's starting to change where Tinton Falls is getting to be almost all white. Again, the demographics is changing because older blacks are moving out or died off or can't afford to live in Tinton Falls. And we have these people coming in from the city or North Jersey, and now they're trying to rule what's going to go on in the schools. And like my granddaughter is in second grade now. She has, like when my kids were there, there was like, my kids are in the 30s and early 40s. There was like 10 kids, 8 to 10 kids in class. It was like a private school. She's in second grade, and my one daughter is in education. She has 26 or 28 kids in her class. And the other thing too, and she's like, there's two black kids in her class. So we see the demographics, whatever, even at the high school. But one thing that I notice and what I protest about doing something, being involved in the school, my kids are half Irish. So there was a lot of controversy about that. What I would see was the applications that you had to fill in that had the race on it. You know how many papers would come back to the house? Was what we marked on them. And they noticed that, and then with being on committees, looking at the books, how they just disgraced people. It was just, they were supposed to be on the committee at Monmouth Region at the high school.
But thank you.
And but it's these type of things, and then your children are questioning that. Why do we have to fill this out? And why, this is what we are. Okay. This is what they're asking, why can't we put it down?
Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yes, I did, because you had asked whether you, I couldn't stand living in Lily White Homedale anymore, and I moved to Red Bank. Good for you. And I've been happy ever since.
Sarah, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I came in late, but Reverend Porter updated me about the application for the memorial in Eatontown is in process. I had heard at our film screening in Lake Rock a couple weeks ago that community education was part of the process of obtaining the monument.
Yes.
And so I was interested in participating in that as sort of a laboratory of, there's a concrete reason, there's a specific thing that there's a structure in which to go and knock on doors in Eatontown. I live in West Long Branch and close to Eatontown, and raise awareness. And so I guess I just wanted to express that interest and maybe have some discussion about that as an activity. And
absolutely. Let's connect afterwards, because we definitely have that component.
I have something to say about Bingo Jack. I was on that committee that is put. There was a committee that put that boulder and plaque there. What we had to go through to get that, even though we had a lot of support and we did fundraising. I probably can talk after because I already talked to Reverend Porter about that. Gave him the DVD on some of the things, but it's like maybe some of the original members that was on that committee needs to be invited into that, and even the author of the book.
Yeah.
Because some of those buildings still exist.
Okay.
Kerwin, do you want to tell just a little bit about what happened to Mingo Jack, that story?
So Mingo Jack, Samuel Johnson, he was accused of raping a white woman. And
This was 1886.
1886, he was accused of raping a white woman. He was known because he was a jockey at, I think it was Monmouth Race Park. And the woman apparently said that he was a big black guy and his name is Jack. And people knew Mingo Jack from the race park, and so they went and got him and they took him to the Eatontown lockup. The sheriff or whoever was guarding him left that night, and then a mob broke in and took him out and lynched him. And so that their group did put a boulder there with a plaque on there. And since EJI has done its work and they found that this was New Jersey's only documented lynching, that's why we're working to get that marker established there and to begin those conversations, to facilitate those conversations, because many people in the area probably have no idea that it happened. And probably think that most lynchings happened down south or it didn't happen up in New Jersey. And so our program, our project, is to go around to venues like this, to different areas, to educate the public, to knock on doors, to let people know what happened and what can happen again if citizens don't pay attention and aren't engaged. And so yeah, let's talk afterwards, because we definitely like to include members from that original committee in what we do.
I actually wanted to talk about, so I went to a predominantly black school from preschool to 5th grade, and you brought up Tinton Falls Middle School. We transitioned over there 6th grade. That was my first time being around that many white students and white people. So it was exposure to a certain culture of people that I hadn't been. And in my time in elementary school, I was in accelerated programs, advanced classes. But when I went there, they didn't put me in those. I actually had to prove myself and work my way back into those classes, even though I had proven before. And fortunately, ended up graduating a year early from high school. But it just reminded me, like, that was an experience that I had to prove myself, and that I was intellectual enough to be in those classes.
I had to fight for my son to be in those classes. It was one girl, she was mixed, and my son, he took SATs in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But I had to fight, and then when it came to 8th grade, he said enough.
Yep. And I had an experience there myself with white boys at a cafeteria table screaming white power in 6th grade. I had that experience. But you brought up how long is it going to take? I feel like if you break a bone in your leg 6 weeks, you break it back 6 months. But this was 400 years worth of trauma, historically intertwined, so it'll take just as much time or half the time in order for us all to be on a collective mindset and that we want to change it. It would take just as much time to change it. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we commemorated 400 years last year.
Yeah.
And it's great to have a black man on a stallion in Richmond and wherever it is. It's wonderful, but that feels like a drop in a huge ocean. And it just doesn't feel like what we're doing is enough. And I know we're not going to talk politics, but it doesn't feel like this administration has, excelled, pushed us forward in any way. But I just feel like am I the only pessimistic one in the room who feels like this is not going to change anytime soon?
No, you brought up a good point in that this audience, collectively, we want to talk about race. We have to speak to people who don't want to talk about it to make the change.
But the fact that we're talking to the choir often needs to be talked to. Because we have feelings, we have sentiments, we have places where we agree, but if we had the empowerment, then we wouldn't need to be in this room. So there's got to be a collective growth from this conversation that, as Kerwin said earlier, what happens when we walk outside of this room? Every year I'm blessed to be able to speak at several Dr. King events, and I always ask the same question: where are you going to be on Tuesday? Or are we just going to meet again next year? And it's pervasive. Eric Dobson tells a story. His dad's a preacher, and one Christmas he didn't want to go to church, and so his dad said, "Well, fine, then go volunteer somewhere." So he went and volunteered at a soup kitchen, and he worked hard, and when the day was over, he said to everybody, "Well, thank you for letting me be here today. I'll see you again next year." And they looked at him and said, "Next year? These folks are in line tomorrow." And that's the way we treat these conversations.
So
we
here's,
have a couple of comments, but maybe we can ask people what things have worked, what we can do when we leave the room. I mean, we're bringing up some important issues, but we want to talk about
how do we go
action.
forward? Right. So
just let a couple people talk, and then we'll do that.
okay.
Wait, I saw you and Libby. 1, 2, 3.
You first?
Sure.
A couple of things relating to what you just said, Reverend Webb. Do you all know the Color of Law, the book The Color of Law? New Jersey, why are the schools in New Jersey more segregated now than they were in the 60s? The Color of Law makes it very clear that residential segregation was enforced by our governments. I mean, from the local level all the way up, and we're seeing the results in segregated schools. There's a lawsuit now suing, there's a group of people suing the state, and it's gone into discovery. I'm not a lawyer, so I need somebody else to explain it to me, but they are trying to make the state deal with the segregated schools now. So that's one thing to do, is to be aware of that and try to support it when you can. I think another thing we can do is think about the language that we use. I've heard today the word slave used several times. Something I try to do is to say enslaved people, to remember that they were human beings. They were not a different class of something, which to me, when I hear the word slave, it's like it's not a real person. So those are small things, but keep on bringing them up, and people will hear you and say, why are you saying it that way?
One of the things that would be worth investigating is the state of Maryland does not have local school boards. Their schools are organized county-wide, and almost every child is on a bus. So there's no, they are being bused in. Everybody is on a bus going someplace fairly local. But because the governing body is county-wide, all kinds of communities are involved, and all of those children are mixed up all the time. And it's just worth looking at.
This man and then.
Yeah, so one of the things, I have 2 little boys, 5 and 8, who go to school in private school in Spring Lake Heights on scholarship. So, but one of the things that they are the only chocolate kids in their classroom, right? And talking about what has worked or what do we do. Last year, they little white boy called my son's dirt, and he said, "Oh, y'all are dirt and the white people are wood." Oh, that incensed their father. And of course, I called the parents, and I called the parents for a meeting at the school. They showed up in their, I'm trying not to be political, but they showed up in their Trump, Trump attire. And I'm like, oh, so this is spreading, just infecting this poison into these young people. And so what we've done this year is I've gone in several times, and we'll continue to go in and read books to the class and talk about race, right? And have them understand that, discrimination is wrong. We're all part of the human race, and the diversity is something to cherish instead of something to despise. And it's really for some of them eye-opening, because they're now going home and telling their parents different than what they heard their parents say. And the parents have called the school's principal complaining, talking about my child is saying that everybody's equal and everybody's important. And so now I'm having to meet with the parents to have these type of conversations. But I really think, for me, the practical part is starting young and having them to then, starting young and having the conversations and letting them know that there is an alternative thought than trying to separate and segregate people one from the other. Because even my youngest son, you know, again, he's the only chocolate kid in his class, and they're laughing at his hair. He has hair like mine, real curly, and they, you know, people are like, why are you? He came on a couple weeks ago saying, Daddy, can we cut off all my hair? I'm like, what do you mean? Your hair is gorgeous. You got it from me. And but he's like, people keep talking about it, and they're pulling. So again, you know, I've gone looked through some books, and I'll be there on Friday at his class reading books on their level to and then engaging them in a conversation, because it's not happening at home. But my hope is that on a practical level, if we can have that conversation at school, that we know these little kids are going to go home and tell their parents. I want the parents to come back and say, you know, complain, so that I can talk to them again and face to face. Because I think so much stuff is said in private that they don't expect to get out into the public. When it does, you know, they shame, they cower back. But I want them to confront the ingrained racism and discrimination that they probably may not have even, some of them were unaware, or at least they thought they said they were. Whether they were or not, who knows? But I do think that that's a practical thing that we can do.
There is a book called Let's Talk About Race that came out last year for young people, for your oldest child.
Okay.
I think that'd be a good book to read.
Awesome,
to
thank
them.
you. I appreciate it.
And then I think, we have these discussions in our church, St. Thomas Episcopal Church. We end up taking it out of the church into the schools, especially the high schools. Now, this is maybe about 10 years ago, but we started in church, and we went to all the different local high schools to make a difference and make the awareness. So possibly the same thing can circle around to schools.
I'm glad to hear that everybody seems to be, general consensus is that we need to start with our children and with education. Because as I started by saying that America has been willfully miseducated, voluntarily ignorant, and the only way we can change that is not only by talking to our children, but we have to insist that the history books are rewritten to tell the true history of what America really was. Because those books were written by those who were in power, and it has been accordingly skewed in that particular perspective. So the first thing we have to do is to start telling the truth about who we are and how we got to where we are. And so education is, in fact, that one inroad that can really make a difference. So what you can each do when you go home is ask your children if they've learned anything about African American history in their history books at school.
NJEA is making a concerted effort now. I don't know if you've heard about the Amistad Project.
The Amistad Project, right.
So, I mean, I think that's going to be part of the
But I must tell you, the Amistad has been on the books for some time. It has not been enacted. So it's not just about making laws. It's about making sure that those laws are being accomplished and followed.
On that subject, in terms of what can be done, so the Amistad law was passed in 2002,
Yeah.
I think?
Yeah, and nothing has
So New Jersey
happened.
state law requiring that all schools, public schools, integrate African American history into regular curriculum, not just a separate subject. But there's no serious oversight or implementation.
There isn't.
So our little group here in Red Bank, I only have 2 little cards, but the Citizens for Diverse and Open Society, actually this handout has some information on it as well, decided to take it on as a project, and some of the folks reached out to the commission repeatedly, trying to get a response. We had a commissioner, came to Red Bank and talked to the group, and then several folks bought a group of 30 or more books. John Lewis's trilogy, graphic novel, March. And it was brought into the Red Bank Middle School, and it was, put into the curriculum. So that's an example of something, concrete that can be done.
As practical helps. I brought this book. It's called Crucial Conversations: Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High. This book tells you how to have difficult conversations with your spouse, your children, your employer, whomever. And I would say it will help you if you're trying to have these conversations with people who are difficult to talk to. Because race is a touchy subject. Because race is so interconnected with other things, and when you touch on one thing, you're going to touch something else. It might be helpful for you to be prepared to have the conversation. Because you can't force someone to listen to you. You can't force someone to hear you. And so preparing yourself before you try to have a conversation on race might help that conversation go better, and you might convert someone to become an ally as opposed to pushing them off by being too forceful. I'll also say that there are some books, this White Working Class, this is by Joan C. Williams, and this talks about essentially white fragility. White people's ego gets frazzled when someone says anything that chips away at their power or status or position. Pre-post-racial America. We want to get to a post-racial America, but we haven't done the work. And so we're just trying to sweep things under the rug and it won't go away. What we have to do is educate ourselves and prepare ourselves for the challenges that we face. I'll say this last thing and then we can
I'll
turn
just
it
add
over.
another book to that list.
Okay.
Actually, I'll add two more books. The Tears We Cannot Stop, and that's by Michael Dyson. It's a sermon to white America. And this is a more accurate description of American history than is currently in our school systems. It's called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, and this tells you the true history of what happened after Reconstruction to African Americans in this country.
So, just a further comment about the transformation, the raising of awareness. The movements that arose, beginning with Trayvon Martin, the Black Lives Matter movements. I could just speak, as a person who knows a white dude whose consciousness was race. He was like, he was not a big deal, race, what's a big deal? After these movements started, 2014, 2015, people in the streets, the social media, he started to understand. And he changed. So there may be a lot of people like him, talking about a guy in his 40s, just want to let you know that it's not maybe as bleak as it looks.
And I understand what you're saying, and the intention of change is valid. However, we have to go beyond that point because ignorance isn't going to save us. And just because we don't know won't stop what's coming from hitting us. So we have to go beyond, the just an altruistic spirit, and we have to be consciously invested. And to do so, we do have to start in a structural way because this was structurally destroyed.
Really quickly.
Yeah, I did want to mention something. Many of us here probably are aware of brown eyes, blue eyes, okay? That's something that worked, and it worked magically. The kids who went through that, the white kids, they are now different people based on what they experienced on themselves, reading and talking in discussions. That's the way to start. Yeah. But you can turn off a lot of, especially today's children, with short attention spans, with need for satisfaction. Let them go through a modern version. We can't do that with Jane anymore. I don't even know if she's still alive. I brought her in at the labs, and we freaked those engineers out. I mean, for a week, most of them couldn't work. Okay, that was a trauma. Wow. But if you put those young children through that experience or something based on brown eyes, blue eyes, I can tell you they all come out. You can have 10 lectures and it won't make the difference.
Can you describe that just briefly?
The brown eyes, blue eyes was a lady. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, she brought this program into schools where she separated the children. You are the blue eyes and you are the brown eyes. And the blue eyes could do anything they wanted. They could have extra food at the lunch. They could have a longer break. When they made a comment, the teacher would excuse it. And the brown eyes, just the opposite. They couldn't even go to the bathroom. And she had to get permission from the parents first, and many did agree. And then a day later, she changed it. And what the experience was amazing, because now that some of the kids wanted to get back because they had been treated poorly. And they had experienced what it was. It was an amazing program. I brought it into my labs, and we put few engineers through it. And eventually we had to stop it because they couldn't do any work for me. And they were angry. Could you imagine, you have this PhD can't go to the bathroom because he was a brown eye.
I'll say this.
But it worked. It worked.
Experiments like that, experiential learnings work. One of my jobs this past summer, we went on a civil rights pilgrimage with high school students. It was about 16 high school students. There were, I want to say, 9 or 10 white kids, and the rest were either black or some other race. I was excited that there were white children that were going to experience the sites on the Freedom Rides. So we started in Atlanta, Georgia, Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King's home, those types of things. Went through Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church, the Civil Rights Museum, went to Jackson, Mississippi. We went to the barn where Emmett Till was hung. We went to Fannie Lou Hamer's grave. And those students in that, because we would go, we'd have a day of sightseeing, and we have somebody that was talking about the history of what happened. And then at the end of the night, we debrief, we talk about it. And for the first few sessions, the few black kids didn't say anything. And the white kids were like, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you talking? We're tired of talking about this. And you're not going to do anything about it anyway. And so, but over time, that loosened up a bit and the conversation started flowing. But I'm saying that to say that there are things that are being done. But we have to think outside of the box. We cannot use the structure that has oppressed black people for centuries to fix black people. And so adding things to the curriculum in school, we see that they'll just slow walk it. Linda, thank you for the language that we use, but me spending 3 years in seminary, I see that as people using words and semantics to not deal with an issue, right? If I say slave or enslaved, I get the difference, but it doesn't make a difference if I'm staring down the barrel of a gun, right? And so we have to get away from these distractions that are valid, but they aren't important. And so, but I think the conversations and experience, allowing students and young people especially to experience these things helps, but then we have to deal with the challenge of they're going back home to their parents.
Yeah.
Whose brains are fixed.
Sometimes children educate parents.
Yes,
also.
that's true.
That's the hope. So my work is with youth and young people, because I strongly believe it's easier to shape a mind than it is to change one. And so the work that I do is really try to work with young people with the hopes that somebody else, the rabbis, the pastors, the teachers, are getting to the adults.
Is there anyone who hasn't signed in? I just want to reassure everybody that the sign-in is only so we can have you on our invitation list for future programs. We're not doing anything else with it.
So we talked a lot about individual feelings about race, and really you have to deal with systemic racism in the systems. And I just want to put a plug in for the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. They are doing amazing work changing the laws and making a difference for black people. So any way you could support them or find out more what they're doing, it's worth it.
I just wanted to say, you know, it seems like there's really a two-pronged thing. We have to change laws. We have to change the system. But there is no substitute for what we're doing here. We're talking, we're listening. More importantly, we're listening. We're getting ideas that we can bring out to the community, to our families and neighbors and coworkers. And I know a lot of you have heard me mention Daryl Davis. For those of you who don't know who he is, go on YouTube and you can watch a couple of short little talks that he has given. This is a middle-aged or so black musician who has made a habit, a practice of befriending Klansmen. And he stands up there and he tells you the story, very matter-of-factly, of how he first encountered racism, and then he started having these conversations with these white supremacists, including the Grand Wizard of Maryland and others. They did a documentary on him as well. It's a full hour. But effectively, he just would talk to them and he would listen to them. And you can only imagine how hard that was for him to do, knowing the contempt that they had for him. He even went to Klan rallies, knowing he might get killed if somebody was in a bad mood. Nevertheless, the friendship and the respect that he showed to these people at the time of the talks that I listened to, over 200 of those Klansmen renounced their membership and turned their backs to him.
Wow. And in a way, he knew they weren't really his friends, really. I mean, we keep saying you befriended them, but not.
You have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, and it shouldn't always be on the burden of our black brothers and sisters to have to constantly have these conversations.
So, last words, thoughts?
Wonderful conversation. I appreciate the thoughts and the honesty here. But I'll go back to where Kerwin and I started. When we leave this room, what's different? We have to create conversations, not just gather for conversations. We need to show up with each other, not just at events, but in life. And that's the only way to educate each other about each other. Otherwise, we'll dance into rooms and then dance back out of the rooms. So a lot of the work that a lot of us do, we show up everywhere because we want to engage, we want to make relationships, we want to get to know the people. And I think that needs to be the paradigm for anybody that says this matters, that we need to do it. And if we don't, then we pat ourselves on the back, and I don't mean to be pejorative and negative, but we're good at patting ourselves on the back because we did a good thing for race relations because we showed up. So if it matters, and it does matter, then we need to engage people and again, return to human. I've led 2 interfaith clergy trips to Israel. I'm the interfaith chair for a Jewish Federation. And I gathered the troops about 3 weeks ago. And we're sponsoring a series of listening conversations. The first one's March 1st at St. George's by the River Episcopal Church. The Jewish Federation, I'm sorry?
In Rumson?
Yeah. Then April or May, we're waiting for a date. The Jewish Federation is going to be sponsoring an iftar dinner during Ramadan at one of the mosques in Brunswick. And then we've got a June date for a conversation at the Diocese in Metuchen. And the goal is to bring people together more than once and in diverse settings to figure out how we can hear legitimately each other's pain, each other's angst and anguish, and then figure out how we engage past the I'm walking away angry all the time. So please dive in and create events, create opportunities to get to know neighbors, and we don't have block parties anymore. We don't close the street and everyone just goes in. When we
in Red Bank they did. Honestly,
I live here. We haven't had one yet where I live. We're going to have one this spring. We've already started planning it. But so that's my closing thought: is let's make sure that when we leave here tonight, that we didn't leave here tonight.
Sure.
I don't have anything incredibly deep to say. I do want to recommend a book that it kind of speaks to what the doctor was saying, you were saying, and someone else in the audience was saying about stress. If you haven't read Joy DeGruy Leary's Post-Traumatic Slaves, you have to read it. Like the anxiety, the stress that we experience through slavery, it's the way we raise our children. It's in it now, it's everything. So if you haven't read that, please read it. And if you're interested in going to Ghana, I'd love to take you. So, and I want to just also say one of my favorite my favorite quotes is, I'm a part of all I've met. So as pessimistic as I am, I feel like everything that you all have said has permeated me in some way and has made me a lot more optimistic, so.
The only thing I have to say is to stay empathetic, understanding to other cultures and other people and their situations and what they go through. And stay committed to change, even in moments of failure. The success is at the end of it.
And this is what I would say, and this is what I try to do with my own thinking. Because we all are susceptible to preconceived notions, preconceptions. We're all susceptible to the environment that we've grown up in, and those around us. But whenever you find yourself making a judgment or a decision about someone based on invalid data, just ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? Whatever conclusion you're coming to, follow that up with that question. What if that's incorrect? Whatever it is you're thinking, whatever generalization you're making, whatever judgment you're making, whatever conclusion you're coming to, just ask yourself the question after you've reached those conclusions and judgments and whatever else. What if I am wrong? Because just that question is going to get you to dial into a different consciousness. And you can do that by yourself, for yourself. What if I'm wrong? And if you really want to know, then maybe instead of reaching a judgment without valid evidence, you might want to ask that person a question about whom you've made that judgment. And that in itself is what we can all do with each other. And that's a simple thing. It doesn't take, we don't all have to be Mother Teresa. We can literally change our consciousness, change our perceptions, and move in a different direction by just asking that question, what if I'm wrong?
Because we have to realize that we're all prejudiced.
Yeah.
Whatever
those conceptions
we've
are.
all got it, and the question is that where we stay?
Yeah. So don't just reach those conclusions, but question them.
The last thing I'll say, starting point is important. Whenever we're encountering someone, whenever we're having a conversation with someone, the starting point is important. Where do I start this conversation? What is my basic level of understanding whatever this topic is? What is that person's basic level of understanding whatever that topic is? And then take your conversation from there. Because if my starting point is being oppressed, but yours is now I'm free because I don't have chains, we're starting at different places and we will never come together. But if you understand my starting point as someone who has been disadvantaged historically, you might think differently about how you suggest I move forward. Also, we talk about what needs to be done, but think about the how. What if I don't understand the how? Help me get there before you judge my work ethic or thought or what have you. I started this by saying I don't want to just talk about race, I want to do something about it. The Social Justice Remembrance Coalition, we have been tasked through our proposal with doing educational events and promotional events to let people know. If you want to do something, if you want to facilitate a conversation, if you want to sponsor some of our events, see me afterwards so that I can put your name down and we can coordinate something, because going beyond these walls will be helpful, because it shows that we aren't the only ones that are concerned, and some people may not know, and we have to give them the opportunity to be educated and informed about it. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me.
Please talk amongst yourselves. There's some handouts.